me introduce our distinguished speakers. Mr. Akbar is well known in India and abroad as a prolific writer and a mature politician. His journalistic career commenced in 1971 with the Times of India, and later it got expanded to several other newspapers. He's also a well-known author who has published many books, including Nehru, The Making of India, A Tinderbox, India, The Siege Within, and Right After Right, just to name a few. His political career started as a Congress MP from Bihar in 1989. He was the official spokesman for the late Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. Later, he re-entered the political arena in 2014 as a BJP member and was elected to the Rajya Sabha and was appointed Minister of State for External Affairs in 2016. Considering his long-standing journalistic career and experience as a mature Indian politician, he is eminently suitable to discuss India-Sri Lanka relations, particularly the challenges and opportunities for our bilateral relations. Now, if I may look into the kind of relationship what we have between our two countries, there have been many positive developments in the recent past. There have been several visits by Prime Minister Modi to Sri Lanka. In July this year, President Wickremesinghe, Ranil Wickremesinghe, visited New Delhi. There have been high-level visits to Sri Lanka, including from External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Both countries give high priority to connectivity and also people-to-people relations, which resulted in the recent decision to revive the ferry connection between Nagapattinam and Kankasanthore in Sri Lanka, as well as the century-old Rameswaram Talaimanna ferry service. Now, looking at the economic front, India has generously extended nearly $4 billion in loans and various other kind of assistance to Sri Lanka to bail out the country from the economic slide, which ended with declaration of bankruptcy early part of last year. Meanwhile, in the investment front, the Adani Group has agreed to make substantial investments in Sri Lanka, including in the port of Colombo, for which $700 million deal has been signed, with $553 million coming from the USA. Adani Green Energy is also developing 500 megawatt wind energy project in the Gulf of Mannar, where there is supposed to be 30,000 megawatt of wind power available. This was at a cost of $442 million. Further, a grid connectivity between the two countries have been envisaged, as well as an oil pipeline to reactivate the Trincomalee tank farm is also on the drawing board. Meanwhile, an agreement has also been signed between the two countries to develop the long neglected Trincomalee, which has the world's second largest natural harbor. Now, come to the question, Mr. Akbar. On the political side, despite seemingly close relations, does the Indian political hierarchy believe that our bilateral relationship is on a firm footing? Or, in the alternative, is there a feeling that the relationship suffers from a deficit of trust? or to put it in a different way, that India is being taken advantage of by Sri Lanka. May I ask your views on the matter? Over to you.
Thank you very much. Anat, it's always a pleasure to speak to you, and more particularly to be in the environment of Pathfinder Foundation. It's one of the, I think, one of the great institutions now of Colombo and Sri Lanka in the think tank environment, in the think tank world. And indeed, it is what I would call an activist organization, not a sort of laid back institution. As far as your question is concerned, I think we should be very, very clear. You know, I don't hold back any punches on any subject. It should be very clear that India is neither weak nor is it naive. So India cannot be taken advantage of. I mean, that really is out of the, you know, I think that is best kept out of the discourse. India takes a mature view of its policy options. As far as the neighborhood, and I think among our neighbors, Sri Lanka is one of our more valued partners. We follow the policy very clearly identified, laid down by Prime Minister Modi, which is neighborhood first policy. And this is not based on, believe me, on charity. This is based on a very clear understanding that a neighbor's health is a very a necessary component of our health as well. And you know, the Prime Minister himself has often enunciated his philosophy, which is that the world is a family. But if the world is a family, then those who are closest to us should also be the nearest to us in terms of working together. Geography, by the way, is not the only consideration for a definition of a neighbor. For us, a neighbor is defined by reach, not by distance. If you cannot reach a neighbor, then of what use is geographical proximity? But with Sri Lanka, it is despite history of some turbulence, we have always never lost our reach with each other. And this reach is identified in very practical ways. And the practical ways are the practical ways are the ways in which tourism has flourished, in which trade has flourished, and which there is such a deep bonds of trust that translate into economic sinews. We have a neighbor. It's not a secret. We can't fill one flight a year to that neighbor. On the other hand, with Sri Lanka, with Bangladesh, with others, there are no seats available. In fact, in terms of reach, I think our neighborhood now extends, the arc of neighborhood now extends from the Gulf right up to Indonesia, in which South Asia obviously is a very central component of this region. This arc of neighborhood is built on mutual benefit. And this mutual benefit includes an understanding that the strategic security is also a notion which has to be developed by mutual understanding, and I think by reaching a common platform by which we appreciate that any attempt to disturb the strategic security of a region leads to complications which are best avoided and which are unnecessary. In terms of our relationship with Sri Lanka, I think let's be very practical. If since the war, one of the great sort of foreign policy achievements has been the way in these two old friends have rediscovered their need for each other. We are very clear. We understand that that Sri Lanka is an independent country, will have its independent views, but the independence of views necessarily includes, just as we reach out to Sri Lanka when Sri Lanka is in a crisis, right? We expect that Sri Lanka will equally understand as a friend and as a brother that our perceptions of security should be part of the understanding with which Sri Lanka takes its own decisions.
Thank you very much. There is yet another question I have in mind with regard to strategic relations between our two countries. But let me now move on to another important subject that is in our minds for the last 35 years or so. That relates to the 13th Amendment adopted in 1987 to the Sri Lankan Constitution, which has not been fully implemented for all these years, even though it is a provision that has been incorporated into the constitution of the country. Many Sri Lankans still believe, rightly or wrongly, that it was an imposition on Sri Lanka by India. Now the question is the necessity for the full implementation of the 13th Amendment to the Sri Lankan Constitution has been a constant reminder from New Delhi, even though the provincial administration, based on the Indian federal system of governance, has failed in Sri Lanka all these years. I'm now talking about 35 long years. Now the question is it not the time for Sri Lanka to revisit the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, resulting from the Indo-Ceylon or Indo-Sri Lanka Agreement of 1987, and examine how best the country could address the issues faced by the minority communities in the country? Over to you, sir.
Let's begin by addressing a part of which I know you're a very polite person, and perhaps that is why you didn't mention it. But I want to state in very simple words. India doesn't believe in being a big brother. It's very, very, I think it is a foundation stone of our thinking that there are no big nations and small nations. There are only equal nations. That is the charter, that is the philosophy by which the age of the nation state, which actually has emerged step by step. In fact, it began to emerge in a practical way with the collapse of empires after the First World War, and then definitely with the collapse of colonialism after the Second World War. We are very proud that if colonialism in a real sense began in India, then colonialism also died in India after the movement led by Mahatma Gandhi, and it was defeated by non-violence. If we have a defense policy, we have a defense ministry. Every nation says it has a defense ministry. We are very clear that when we say that we have a defense ministry, we mean it. We don't have an offense ministry. Many people, perhaps in Sri Lanka, may not agree with that. But when we moved into, when we were asked, we've had a troubled history in South Asia. In this weekend, I hope to go to Dhaka and speak on the Liberation Day commemorations, Liberation Day celebrations. The Indian Army went to Dhaka, helped the Mukti Bahini liberate the country. This happened in 16 December, and we were back out by March. Sometimes there have been necessities in Maldives and so on, where we've had to move, but at the request and at this. we have absolutely no desire for any domination. On a lighter note, it is difficult enough, managing the problems of India. Who would want to add to the problems by managing somebody else's problems? Uh, we don't believe, and I think it's very important to stress that our attitude towards help, you mentioned the $4 billion, we gave it, and we did it without believing in a debt trap. I think that is a problem that you have faced and you will acknowledge, which has happened in your relationship with some other countries. So sometimes things go wrong, yes, right? And then it is in the mutual interest of both nations to correct it. As far as 13th Amendment is concerned, I followed the story. I was actually in Sri Lanka on the day it was signed. Yeah, and I could see the consequences immediately. But I'm talking about the pact with Jayawardene actually. But the important thing really is the measure of trust between the government and certain sections of its populations. There is history, and there is, I think, the 13th Amendment and the relationship with the Tamils has more than its share of historic turbulence. So the real question for the future is not what happened in the past, my friend. What the real question is, how will we bring total trust between two sets of citizens, citizens of your country, not citizens of our country. Right? And it is this measure of trust that needs to be restored completely. It's a process. If I think back to the end of the war, which is the end of the first decade, till today, we are already about 14 years later, right? If any objective analysis of this period will be an extremely positive one. Just look at the wars that are happening in the world today. Just today, right now, as we speak. One war is from 100 years ago. The other war is has been lasting 75 years. Continuous and deep, horrific bloodshed, right? But there is peace in your country. There is peace, I think, and that peace has happened, I think, because we have worked together to find that peace. And I think instead of being trapped in contentious laws or in contentious dialogue, let us quietly, you don't need to beat a drum when you're doing something good, right? Let us quietly continue to build the trust, continue to build an economic future for all sections of Sri Lanka, for all the people of Sri Lanka, as I am absolutely confident under Prime Minister Modi's leadership is happening to all sections of Indians today. In the end, all political problems are resolved by economic success and by the feeling that every single citizen of any country is a participant in economic growth. Once that happens, the problems dissolve, they melt away, or they resolve themselves.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. When I spoke about the issue, I deliberately used the word minority communities because we have more than one. Yes, there is a fairly large Tamil community in Sri Lanka. There is also a Muslim community in Sri Lanka, and they have to coexist with the rest of the population. And it is up to the Sri Lankan population to come into terms with the prevailing situation and see how best they could come to some sort of a political arrangement. So what I had in my mind was, after 30 odd years, it is time for us to look forward, not backward, and see what other alternatives we have in place of 13th Amendment if it has not worked all these years. Okay, let us put that subject aside and we'll move into another important subject, which involves India, which is economy of Sri Lanka. Now, as you know, Sri Lanka has faced a deep economic recession, trying to address a massive foreign debt restructuring process and multifaceted economic challenges. India is the fifth largest economy in the world after US, China, Germany, and Japan, with impressive GDP of $3.7 trillion, which has been projected to reach $7 trillion in 2030, and in the process overtaking Japan. India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement was signed in 1998. There have been plans to upgrade the Free Trade Agreement, which attempts have repeatedly failed to materialize, unfortunately. In 2013, there was a projection to increase bilateral trade between the two countries to $10 billion by 2016. However, our bilateral trade currently limited to $5.4 billion. This week, very interestingly, both countries agreed to complete the negotiation for Economic and Technological Cooperation Agreement, ETCA, by March 2024. That means almost within about 100 days' time, and we certainly hope that will be a possibility for us to achieve. Now the question is, Sri Lanka's economy shrank by 7.8% in 2022. And the central bank has predicted a milder contraction, once again, of 2% this year, and a mere 3.3% growth next year. Now, the question is, do you agree that Sri Lanka will be able to perform much, much better if its economy is integrated into the fast developing Indian economy? If it is so, how can that objective be achieved? And if I may ask, what is your take on this particular issue? Thank you.
The levels of integration, what precisely does it mean, right? These are questions which have to be answered first by Colombo, right? Because it is Colombo which has to find its comfort levels. It is Colombo that must feel confident that, there are so many elements, I'm afraid, who are negative and who can easily whip up public opinion. We are both democracies. We cannot muzzle public opinion. We cannot muzzle the right of anyone to raise even artificial issues, right? And the next thing the best of good intentions, or the best of intentions, will be sidetracked or will be trapped in arguments about colonization, neo-colonizations, really arguments which stink of stupidity, but they are there. You can't wish them away. So actually, these levels of integration is something that Colombo has to define first before India agrees or disagrees. One thing is absolutely clear, and this is true of our experience as well, that a rising tide lifts all boats. So if you want to be part of a rising tide, then you must anchor your boat where the tide is rising. That's obvious. Let me give you a very interesting example. I think it was 2003, maybe, or 2002, possibly 3, when I was in Beijing and Prime Minister Vajpayee was there, and we signed a trade agreement. And it was, I think we probably had a trade of 100 million or something. And I think by that agreement, I think the Chinese accepted Indian mangoes or something as permitted in import of Indian mangoes. And we all had great fun and a great laugh and saying this is the great mango agreement between the two great powers of Asia, right? What is 2004, 2024? In 20 years, the trade is over $100 billion. Right? Much to my regret, it is in favor of China as yet. But the point is, it's there. The point is that the trade is happening despite other animosities. Right? Because essentially there's a large element, there is a rational element in our thinking on both countries, which says don't destroy the good in search of the perfect or in search of the ideal. Live, with mutual benefit. If we need things, we get them, and let the problems find their own path to resolution. The pace of the two processes may not be equal or may even not be equilateral, but let both happen. And the fact that it is not happening to the extent that you wish, despite our two countries not having any great outstanding issues anymore, is really indicative of a failure. You mentioned India's growth. I think we need to understand one thing about India's growth. India's growth should not really be seen only through the spectacles of statistics. India's growth, I think you mentioned 6.7%. I think since you put down the question, the estimates have risen closer to 7 or more than 7%. But this growth really is the core of it is internal integration. And this internal integration is the creation of products and services and markets within our country, and products and services that fulfill the needs and improve the quality of the life of the poorest of the poor. That is, I tell you, the key to India's, so not only India's success, to India's leadership in the world economy in the future. 10 years ago, when Prime Minister Modi, in January 2015, when he announced that he would create 300 million bank accounts through the same banking system, by the way. He didn't lift up a banking system from heaven and put it there into India. So the same banking system, to the same people, to the same closer. But these bank accounts would be for those without money. Can you imagine what a revolutionary, radical idea that was? I remember the opposition parties, including the lead opposition party in a country, filled the television stations with jeering, with laughter. And what does this man? And they used to make sounds, the clatter of empty drums. Look at what he's talking about. When he took the next step, and I said, I will make the poor part of the radical strides forward in technology. There was disbelief among even his friends, and of course, the same jeering among his foes. But today, the tech system is being used by the poorest of the poor in order to they're using mobile phones to make payments. They're using entertainment. Netflix has just announced that its largest growth anywhere is going to be in India in the next decade, and so on. I can multiply the number of this thing. It is the integration of the poor who were outside India's economic growth story that has really led to this quantum leap. And that is also why very often economic change and economic growth can cause great disturbance. You know that. But why it has been so smooth? It has been smooth because the poor also feel that they are part of the growth story. And that is what is the dramatic change, right? When you talk of integration between our two countries, And I would urge you, my friend, to think of Indian economy not simply as a statistical fact, but to think of India as a socio-economy, as an economy with a social face, and see how this must be actually replicated by your own means, by your own policies, not by us, right? By your own independent thinking and your own this, how you can convert the poor and those who feel dispossessed comparatively into the part of the growth story. Only then will any nation's economic crisis be actually averted or will be converted into a success story.
Thank you. Well, our free trade agreement was signed in 1998 rather. We are in 2023. In between, we have tried our best to move forward from the free trade agreement. Unfortunately, it has failed. But again, as I mentioned earlier, there is an agreement on the part of Sri Lanka that by March we should complete the new trade agreement, ECTA. So we hope that will be a step in the right direction. And that will perhaps be the first step towards this integration, which we will have to follow if we want to lift Sri Lanka's economy from the present status in which it is now. In your answer or response to me, you also made reference to India-China relations, trade relations. Let me focus on that relationship a little bit. India-China relations have had repercussions for both countries and substantive implications for South Asian states. There have been quite a few instances in the recent past where the two countries almost reached the point of engaging in armed conflict. However, despite the tense security situation, the two countries enjoy robust economic ties to the extent, as you mentioned. China has been India's largest trading partner for several years, with massive trade deficit amounting to $100 billion. That speaks of the volume of trade between the two countries. The adverse bilateral relations between India and China impact negatively on the relations South Asian countries have with China. For example, occasional visits of Chinese vessels, such as Yongman 5 in August 22, and a more recent visit by another research vessel, Xiyang 6, both dubbed as spy ships, have caused considerable concern to India. Moreover, if I remember, in 2014, there was a visit or two by Chinese submarines to Colombo port, which also caused considerable difficulties in our relations. So that is the background. In addition to that, we also find that in 2019, India opted out of the 15-member Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, on which platform China is going to play a leading role. So where China is concerned, it has a dominant role to play not only in politics in the region, but also economics. My question is, are China and India actively working towards a political settlement to their border dispute, or are they in a permanent stalemate stage? Will India's current alignment with the United States make the prospect of a settlement even more distant with India's tie-up with the Quad? Does India believe it advantageous for China to keep the border dispute simmering without a negotiated settlement? While asking those questions, Sri Lanka also faces a difficult situation, having to address India's concern over China-Sri Lanka relations. I'm sure you will have a lot to share with us on these particular questions with us today. Over to you.
Your very mild description of Chinese vessels. Well, they were not really holiday cruise ships, right? They were they were not innocent yachts which some Chinese tycoon was using to enjoy the beaches of Sri Lanka. Right? These Chinese vessels were packed with, which of recent, were packed with electronic equipment, which is picking up a fundamental requirement of strategic interest, which is knowledge. Knowledge from below, knowledge from above. I remember those submarines very well indeed. When we asked why exactly they had come, they said, "Oh, we had only come in order to pick up some food or some goods from Colombo." But I can assure you, my friend, that the eggs in Indonesia are as good as the eggs in Sri Lanka. They could have bought all the eggs they wanted, right, from Macau or Indonesia, Malaysia, wherever they wanted. So I don't think it's very. I don't think it's. I'm trying to find the right word for it. Helpful to actually give legitimacy to a facade. As I said in the very beginning, India is not naive, India is not weak. So you can't take advantage of India. And I think to the north, in the Himalayas, where our conflicts with China really take on a very harsh visage or very harsh reality, we are, we are still honoring an agreement made in the late 80s, which is peace and stability are more important actually than a resolution of what is possibly irresolvable. I really think that is one of the most mature, and that is why it has lasted. There has been tension on the border, but yet there has not been, thank God, gunfire. There are elements in Beijing, right, who do not believe in the axiom which upon which we agreed, which is that let sleeping borders lie. Regrettably, Beijing has elements which elements which are tempted by hegemony. Even as we talk, satellites are picking up Beijing's literal acquisition of land along the Bhutan border, confident that Bhutan does not have the capacity to respond. Right? Beijing does have people who want to prey upon weaker neighbors. Right? They want to prey. I mean, the latest, this might surprise you or perhaps even shock you. They've now told Pakistan that the defense equipment you bought, you haven't paid for. Right? So behind all these smiles, the death trap always hovers like a noose with the best of friends. I mean, not a friend. Pakistan is virtually a neo-colony, a self-declared neo-colony. So I think that we really can learn from the positive experience of India-China relationships, which is get along with what is can be done on the positive side. Try and keep the negativities under control. They will burst up occasionally, but they can be still managed and kept under control by wise leadership. And I think, at least as far as India and Sri Lanka are concerned, we do not, thank God, have any great problems of this nature to resolve. I really think that the options between our two countries are really waiting to blossom. And all we need is confidence on both sides. I think the events of the past 2 years, including India's great help to Sri Lanka, without strings, attached by a harsh noose, has laid the grounds for a lot of confidence. And I'm extremely hopeful about the future. The linkages that you mentioned, the fact that there is now ferry uh, sort of roots being revived, resurrected after decades. All these are signs that the two nations have rebuilt the psychological bridges which had been damaged by events.
Thank you. I think a couple of weeks ago, we were having a exchange with regard to, again, Sri Lanka's location, as well as the various kinds of navies visiting Sri Lanka's ports. And we were doing a calculation and found that great majority of ships, I'm talking of naval ships, come to Sri Lanka from the United States. No, starting from India, 2 United States, 3 Japan, and way below the list was China. So then, of course, there are other countries that regularly visit Sri Lanka. So true, as you say, if they want to pick eggs or meat or whatever it is, there are other places they could do so. And also, is it not the fact that if they want to engage in surveillance work, that kind of activity, without entering into the territorial waters of Sri Lanka or ports of Sri Lanka, they could still engage in such activity within the open sea, what you call the high sea, which is accessible to everybody according to the 1982 Convention of the Law of the Sea. So there is well, of course, their intentions may not be just to pick eggs or whatever it is, but maybe other things. But then the point is, how does Sri Lanka say yes to one kind of a ship and not say no to another? I understand that there is a kind of engagement entered into Sri Lanka with regard to having some kind of a rule book for allowing or disallowing naval visits by foreign countries, or how to provide access to them within certain limitations. But it is a difficult task, but we also understand the concerns of India, and I'm sure what has to be done is to have engage in discussion on that subject matter and find a solution so that Sri Lanka will not be placed in a difficult situation vis-a-vis one country or the other country, right? So that is one issue.
I would, if I may be permitted,
Yes, please.
Every country has concerns based on its own experience, right? The fact of the matter is that India and China have had, are still theoretically, not theoretically, in real terms, engaged in a military conflict, right? Which was begun in 1962 by China's invasion, right? Which has not been resolved because the border has not been resolved, right? So we have a special concerns. You had special concerns about the sanctuary that was provided by people who waged a war against the Sri Lankan state, right? We had to understand that. It's not the same as, the concerns that you might express, in relationship with other countries, whether it is Thailand or whether it is Canada or with it, you still have a problem with Canada. Right? And we have to recognize that when you have a problem with Canada, we must urge Canada not to help any terrorist activity. That is what friendship is all about. Are you just another country for us? No. You're a neighbor and a very valued neighbor, and a neighbor with which we have ancient linkages that extend to belief, to dharma, to lots of other factors. So just as you would expect us legitimately to show concern for your concerns, similarly, we would expect you to show concerns for our concerns.
Agreed. So I think this is a matter for us to discuss between the two countries further and to reach some understanding on the matter. I have another question or more, but I think we have already exhausted, Mr. Akbar, 40 minutes of our time. And
I'm sorry for being garrulous.
No problem at all. I think we should also provide some time if there are any questions to be asked by our audience. Do we have any questions, guys? None?
No.
So shall we give an opportunity for anybody?
Can I ask? Yeah.
Sorry, who's? Mr. Pai. Yes. How to?
Yeah.
Can we pin it?
Yeah.
Just a minute.
Yes, you can speak, Mr. Palingakar.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to
That
first
is our
thank.
Mr. Paliakar who is speaking, who was the former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Akbar, just for you to information.
Oh,
Yes.
right. Thank you very much. Very good to know that.
Thank you very much, sir, for your forthright and very, I would say, very succinct at the same time, very comprehensive coverage of issues at hand. In the same vein, I picking up from your very, I would say, enlightened, constructive comment, the last comment you made, that it is the mutuality of concerns that should lie as the foundation of our current handling of the state of Sri Lanka relations. I think that's a very good professional consensus to work on. The question I have is that well, let me first put a little perspective to it. I have always advocated that due to Sri Lanka's fault or due to India's fault, whatever it is, India has some concerns about Sri Lanka's relations with China. I'm just putting it very very blandly and without any diplomatic ambiguity, because you have very rightly said that is the way as two friends and through close nations we should handle this. India does have concerns. Whether they are ill-founded, well-founded, people can debate. But when it comes to security concerns, it's not an objective math calculation, it's a perception, basically, and that we need to address that. Second perspective that I want to put is that we have a logic of our relations lie in history, our proximity, and all that. But at the same time, in the current context, I think, again, the mutuality principle, both countries will be well served to treat India not as a threat, but as an opportunity, especially in economic terms. So based on that, my question is, there seem to be some trust deficit between the two countries, especially on this particular issue, that is Sri Lanka playing a China card with India? What can be done about it? Sri Lanka is very clear, saying that Sri Lanka will not permit any activity, military or economic, that will be inimical to Sri Lanka, India's security interest or strategic outlook. But even with that, visit of these so-called ships, whether you call them whatever, intelligence ships, surveillance ships, or dual-purpose ships, or purely very innocent research vessel, which each one of these ships, there seems to be a uptick of these concerns. Now, Sri Lanka, I believe, is sharing its work on standard operating procedure for these ships with India, and taking on board, as I believe, all concerns that India has with regard to the visits and operations of these ships in the territorial seas. So, beyond that, is there anything else Sri Lanka can do? Because I don't frankly see any other irritant.
But there is no other irritant.
Yeah, I
Yes,
don't think there is any other irritant. So,
Foreign Secretary,
if we
sir,
as a
you
practical,
have actually hit
if
the
I
nail on the head.
if I may finish, if since there is no other irritant, and that each time a ship visits, like they visit any other port in the region, ships visit, this uptick occurs, and then these irritants creeps in. So, what other measures, in your view, can we take to assuage this concern? Because clearly, this is an irritant that should not be allowed to continue to fester. On the other hand, Sri Lanka has invested so much in our ports, being an island nation. Port incomes are a very major source of our incomes. So, do we have to forego that? Or are there any other measures that can reasonably be conceived, in addition to what is being done now in terms of having an agreement, understanding between the two countries for the standard operating procedure for these vessels? I was just struggling with this question. So maybe if you have some, could shed some light on that.
Sir, the largest refinery investment has just been made by China in your country. It hasn't stopped us from giving what a measure of help that we gave. The ships have come, the ships have gone. These incidents have happened before. When it came to a crisis, we put in what we thought was necessary to resolve this crisis, $4 billion. And one of the most pleasing aspects, trust me, of my last visit to Colombo, we met also at Pathfinder, was the enormous ability of the Sri Lankan people to actually find a way through. I mean, we've all seen the images of what was happening on the streets, and the people understood that the price they would have to pay for the rise of radical and disturbing and disruptive elements. So Sri Lanka's recovery from that point is itself a marvel, and we are very proud of the fact that we played some small part in that process. It didn't stop us from helping to the extent that we could, and despite noises from within India, it didn't bother the government of India, and it will not bother the government of India, because the stability, the economic development of Sri Lanka is a very, very important part of any rational thinking in India. So we haven't allowed these incidents to come in the way of acting immediately. Delayed action sometimes is worse than inaction, and or worse than harmful or inimical action. And then we did everything that is possible. But in order to maintain the stability of friendship, you know that it's not only a question of optics, it's a question of, as I said, just understanding the mutual considerations. I don't think that the revenue of your ports will be vastly affected by the non-arrival of two ships. And certainly does not is not even a pinch of dust compared to the help that we provided at a critical moment. I don't recall, maybe I'm wrong, anyone else coming to make such a, to offer and give immediately such help and work with the IMF and so on and so forth. So I think all we are saying, and I think we have every right to say that let us, maintain the friendship in all its dimensions. Obviously, the president of Sri Lanka will go to China. Why would he not go to China for a formal visit? You're an independent nation. You will have independent relations. You will take your investments, as I just mentioned in the beginning. You have taken investments in the past, which may not all have been as fruitious. That's all. That's within your. But I just said that as in terms of the quality of our relation must be protected by the quality of our concern for each other.
Thank you. Let me ask whether there are any other questions.
I have one question.
Can you please identify yourself and your affiliation?
I'm serving in the army, and the Army War College Buttal. Actually, I received this link last evening and registered.
Okay.
Considering the relationships with the India and the Sri Lanka, and we believe as in my perception, we have Sri Lankan diplomacy in different mode and the Indian diplomacy in the different mode. Whereas we also have our friends where we associate everybody, and we believe like we are also not aligned with anybody. India's influence, when we are having our own Sri Lankan diplomacy, I believe like the Indian influence matters a lot to take our decisions. Could you elaborate further whether India is influencing us for our diplomacy, or the India has Indian strategy towards us to keep us their concern on the other hand? That's not my question.
Mr. Akbar, I don't know whether you understood the question.
I've not fully understood the question actually, but I think I get a gist of it.
Okay.
And the gist of it, I would really reiterate what I said in the beginning.
Actually, what I mean is the Indian diplomacy and the Sri Lankan diplomacy differ with the different terms of the understanding of the each countries. So that we in Sri Lanka, we should have our own way of thinking, and the diplomacy should be, should not be influenced by anybody. So we should have our own friends to associate, like the India associate with other countries. So that I believe, because being the India the largest and the richest, or the confident economy in the region, whether you are influencing the Sri Lanka to make our diplomacy by your means. That's what that I wanted to not just to get an idea that India is influencing our diplomacy or not.
I think you underestimate Sri Lanka, my friend. Sri Lanka is not only an independent power, but it has proved its independence all through its history. Right, even in the 1950s, it proved. If you check the history of Sri Lankan diplomacy and the Colombo Plan and so on and so forth, you'd find that Colombo and Sri Lanka has been a very powerful and independent voice always and continues to be so. In fact, in my previous answer, I said that it is perfectly legitimate, not only legitimate, it is your president's decision when he wants to go to China. And why not? It's your decision. Your diplomacy naturally will be focused completely on your national interest. Do you ever believe that the person who is our host and has been a very elemental part of India's, of Sri Lanka's diplomatic history? I mean, do you think they didn't serve their country fully with great integrity and great courage and through some very, very difficult periods? They did, as indeed you in the army did so. So every nation will have its own diplomacy. Every nation will have its own defense and security systems. Every nation will have a bureaucracy and so on, which will protect its interests first and last. And that is the way the age of independent nations is today changing the world and taking it into a positive direction, of course.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Maybe we have a couple of minutes more available. Any other question?
Mm,
No more
No.
questions?
doesn't look
So-
like, but anyone can direct their questions to us later.
Right, so if there are no more questions, all I have to do is to thank you profusely for spending your time and sharing your thoughts and views about India-Sri Lanka relationship, Mr. Akbar. You have been a close friend of Sri Lanka. We appreciate it very much. You keep close contacts with our country and with our institutions, for which we appreciate very much. And we hope you will continue to do so in the future. And let us be in touch. Thank you very much indeed for your time, 1 hour of your precious time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would be very remiss, I think all of us would be very remiss if we did not thank Milinda as the inspiration behind this foundation. And I think as he served a great term as your High Commissioner here in Delhi, it will not be easy to match the contribution that he made at a very, very sensitive time in your history and in our relationships. I think we should congratulate him for his service, and I'm sure his service to his nation will find other forms.
Thank you very much. As you are very well aware, Pathfinder Foundation, he is the founder of this foundation. He is very much in touch with the foundation and gives us various kinds of advice. And he is also the person who made it possible for us to have this interaction this evening. And of course, naturally, we are very proud of him, what he has done during his tenure in India as the High Commissioner of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.